Perfect. Good morning. Thanks a lot for attending today's session on engaging constituents through social and mobile. That's the topic for today. My name is Mathew. I'm a partner in Deloitte's technology strategy practice. I've been with the firm coming up on 14 years right now. And during those 14 years, my travels have taken me through 11 states on projects in either an advisory capacity or in a project implementation capacity, and 3 federal agencies, DISA, Navy, and the Air Force. So do have a pretty decent feel for life in public sector and happenings as far as what's going on. The reason today's topic is very interesting. It's talking about social and mobile. So while this conference is about mobile, there's a huge element of social to this because mobile by itself can't stand alone. There's social, cloud computing, analytics, security. And so we wanted to focus today's session on how mobile and social interact. And I wanted to start off today's session with a very simple example because one of the questions I get a lot from folks is, what do you mean when you say social in a business environment? Because for most people, social means there's Facebook, I post photos for my family to stay connected, and that's really the context of social. And so I wanted to start off with a simple example of what does social mean in a business setting. In 2007, an ER physician got a patient, and the issue with the patient was that the patient had a serrated saw blade through the finger. Don't know how that happened, but that was really the case. And so the question the doctor had was, do I push the blade through or do I pull the blade out? Because the question is, regardless of which path you go, you're going to cause some damage. And so traditionally, in a traditional hospital environment, the doctor would consult with a couple of colleagues, probably check up a couple of health books to see, is there a precedent to this type of case, and what's the best way to do this? In this particular case, the doctor used a social community called CERMO that's used for doctors to collaborate with each other, and it's a global community. And so this doctor posted this particular case out there to say, has anybody else seen a situation like this or a patient like this, and does anybody have a creative idea on how to do this? And in a very quick, short amount of time, the answer came back as a doctor from another part of the world posted a solution. And the answer was, you take a straw, a drinking straw, and you cut it halfway parallel, and you insert the straw right underneath the saw. And then you pull the saw out, and you're not going to cause any damage. And this is one of those creative ideas that this doctor would probably never have come up with by himself, or within the hospital that he was working with, or consulting with the textbooks that he had in his hand, or calling up his colleagues. And the fact that he got this answer in a matter of minutes really talks about the power of the community and crossing all boundaries and really interacting within his social network. So this is just a really simple example, but a really powerful example of how when you bring together a bunch of folks who practice or do a certain craft or trade and connect them, you could actually solve some very complex problems in a very short order of time. And so this is really the concept of a social network within a business setting. The reason this example is important is because, as I mentioned, anytime we think about social, we think about the personal side of things. When you think about how do you apply social in a business setting to break down the boundaries that we have set up for ourselves or our organizations have evolved into, that's really a very powerful statement. So networks, the question is, what are they? Social networks, they're not a new concept. They've been around for a very long time. It could be your graduating class for a lot of sales folks. It could be your Rolodex or your book of contacts. And lately there's been Facebook and Twitter and all these other new mechanisms. But the concept of social networks has been around for a very long time. Here are 4 very simple examples that most of you may be aware of. eBay. It's a network where you match buyers with sellers. It's been around for a while. Most of us have probably used it. It's a very effective way to actually connect with a much larger community than you had within your physical space. Wikipedia, hopefully most of you, if not all of you, have heard of Wikipedia. It's the online encyclopedia where you could actually have subject matter experts or participants from any part of life update wiki entries based on their perspectives, and actually there's the whole check of making sure it's accurate. But the concept of not, not relying on your annual release of the encyclopedia, as in 20 years ago, and actually looking at the latest information is a pretty powerful statement. And this is actually happening through the concept of social networks. So Wikipedia is a pretty reliable way to get informal information very quickly. There's still the concept of you can't cite Wikipedia for formal references and sources in college classrooms and things like that, but at the end of the day, it's a great way to get information really quickly. The third one, Orteig Prize. Back in 1920, Raymond Orteig, if most of you may know of this, he had actually published a $25,000 prize for the person who could fly nonstop across the Atlantic. And 8 years later, a person by the name of Charles Lindbergh claimed that prize. So the fact, well, all of us know about Charles Lindbergh, but the fact that it was this prize and this competition and the social network that actually triggered and inspired Charles Lindbergh to make that quest was a pretty powerful statement. And then lastly, Match.com. Back in the day, the concept of matchmakers existed, where within a certain physical community, a matchmaker had a couple hundred clients who he or she could connect the prospective client with. And now you've totally transformed that into a global community and taken a very traditional art form or very traditional craft and transformed that through technology and the social community to something that we've never imagined before. And today, when you look at the statistics, 1 out of 5 relationships start online. Those statistics change all the time, but that's a pretty compelling argument of how something so traditional has changed through technology and social networks. And so we then come to the two most common technologies that all of us are aware of when we talk about social. This Facebook and Twitter. And when you actually go back to the origins of both of these, Facebook was a tool that was set up to get to know your classmates better at Harvard. Most of you may have seen the movie, The Social Network. Twitter was a tool that was set up to figure out where the next party was going to be. So you take these two very simple tools that was set up for something very tactical by a bunch of people, and you've taken that to transform the world. And the best example is the Arab Spring. The revolution that happened really started on Facebook. And Facebook and Twitter were the ones that actually transformed and gave that whole revolution critical mass. This is just a mapping of how Twitter was used during the Egyptian Revolution. And the blue ones, the blue tweets represent all the English tweets, the red ones represent the Arabic tweets, and it's a mapping of how many tweets and influencers triggered and fueled that revolution. So you take two very basic tools that were set up for something very simple, and you transform that to break down the most complex barriers that have been set up and have existed for hundreds of years. The Facebook story is really powerful when you talk about the Arab Spring, because there were two statements that came out that I thought really validated this concept of Facebook and how it supported the Arab Spring. The first one was the actual leader of the Arab Spring in his interview with CNN at the end of the day said, on behalf of Egypt, I would like to thank Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook for actually allowing us to go through this Arab Revolution. And his exact quote was, if you want to liberate a society, give them access to the internet. That one line by itself I thought was a really strong statement, because you take a simple tool like this, you give people access and give them a forum to collaborate and communicate with each other, and the possibilities are limitless. So that was one quote. The second one, which I thought was a little humorous, was that right after the revolution in January, one of the parents in Egypt just had a newborn baby, and he named his baby Facebook. There's a whole bunch of issues that are going to come up with that when the girl grows up. But Facebook Jamal Ibrahim, that is the girl's name. It kind of goes to show how influential a tool like this had on that person's life and in that community to actually name your daughter after that tool. So while we all look at Facebook as a social platform and a community to interact with each other on a personal basis for the most part, it just goes to show how if you take it beyond the personal setting and bring the right people together, the right tool set, this is what the possibility could be. So then it leads to the question of cross-boundary collaboration. That's a term I've used in the past here. What does that mean in the public sector? And I wanted to cite 3 examples that I thought were leading edge and really good examples for how we in the public sector could use this concept of mobile and social to break down some of the boundaries that exist. The first one is this app that the city of Boston developed. It's called Citizens Connect. It's a way for citizens to identify potholes, issues from a local government perspective. You can take a picture of it. It does the GIS mapping and reports it back to the city, and it opens up a trouble ticket. The city then works on it, proactively communicates with the person who entered or posted that particular request to say, we got it, we're working on it, it'll be resolved in X number of days or X number of hours, and then once it's done, you get a ticket saying you're done. We've resolved that. So the fact that you've actually now engaged the entire community to have skin in the game to make sure that your city is up to date and well kept is something that's never existed before, because in the past it was always government's responsibility by itself to do that. So that's really one good example where you're able to engage citizens using mobile and social for the betterment of the community. The second one, it's similar to Wikipedia, but it's Intellipedia. So right after 9/11 happened, and in the years that followed, there was a 9/11 commission that looked at the report of what happened and are there things we could have done differently. One of the big the recommendations that came out was that our intelligence agencies were not talking to each other to the extent that they should have. And so what happened as a result of that, as a result of this recommendation, and one of the outcomes of that was setting up of this community called Intellipedia, where the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and a whole bunch of intelligence agencies now collaborate with each other and talk to each other and have the spirit of openness and transparency and communication within the boundaries of their specific missions to collaborate with each other. So the fact that, that was a good outcome that came out of the 9/11 report. People wonder if we had done that prior to 9/11, would it have made a difference? But the point is, they're using social and mobile and the concept of collaboration in communities to do something that's never been done before. And lastly, it's the VA industry innovation. This is a competition that the Veterans Administration actually runs. I think it's every year, every other year. It brings people together with the concept of gamification it's the spirit of competition to make sure that we can actually get the most creative ideas for the betterment of the community. So one of the ideas and the prototypes that won last year or the year before was this concept of sensors, applied sensors that are placed on veterans as they go about their daily lives to monitor any issues with heart disease, heart conditions, and it automatically reports that back to the VA, so you could actually proactively catch some of these issues that they're having from a health perspective. And that's a concept that never existed before, and the idea came about when a bunch of people got together virtually using social and mobile to come up with the idea, create the concept, create the prototype, and then build it out for the VA to use. So these are some really cool examples of how government is using mobile and social to better the community. So the point being is this is not a new concept. This has been around for a really long time. The part that makes this really exciting is technology has finally caught up over the last couple of years to enable this to happen. That's really why mobile and social have actually taken on a whole new meaning over the last couple of years. It is not a completely new concept that was invented just 4 or 5 years ago. So this then leads me to one of my favorite examples over the last couple of years, and some of you may have heard of this. DARPA, the actual inventor of the internet, not Al Gore, DARPA actually had this contest a couple of years ago, and this was the actual scenario. So what if you had to find 10 red balloons moored at random locations across the continental US? So think about that. You have the entire continental US. You got 10 balloons in 10 random places, and DARPA's call to the participants, and this was open to anybody, was how quickly can you find these 10 balloons? And so it got me thinking, saying if we in government or in the private sector had to tackle this problem, how would we do it? How would we approach it, and how long would it take? And just a couple thoughts came to mind based on my experiences at a number of states and federal agencies. The first one, we would have to form a working group. We'd have to create a project charter, get a project manager, get a team working. Wait, this is a continental US. This is not just one state. So now I have to get clearance to talk to people in other states. Can I share data with them? I need to get clearance from my supervisor. Well, that's going to take a couple weeks. We do that, figure out all the concerns from a security and a legal perspective. That takes a couple weeks, work through that. We actually start making progress, and then some newspaper writes an article about taxpayer dollars going towards finding red balloons. So the scandal breaks out. We got to address that. It's going to be a couple weeks. Once we're done with the Balloon Gate scandal, we have hearings on that. A couple weeks. So, you know, it's probably going to be about a year before we finally get organized to do something meaningful to go after this real mission, which is finding 10 red balloons. So then I look at the winner of this contest and how long it took that person to find 10 red balloons across the US. You guys want to take a guess on how long it took? So in 8 hours and 52 minutes, the winning team found all 10 red balloons. And when I first saw this and heard about this, I almost fell off my chair. It's like, how did that happen? And so you kind of go back and dissect how this all happened. So the winning team is a person by the name of Riley Crane. He was the leader of that team from MIT, who actually used social and mobile, it's social and mobile on steroids, to a level that no one ever imagined. Some very simple concepts and constructs that he put in place to form his team and how to get organized and work on this that really, you know, blew off all boundaries that, as far as what I had in my mind. So what he did, he created a Twitter page. And he created a Twitter page. By the way, he heard about this contest 4 days before it came out. So it's not like he had a lot of lead time. It was announced just 4 days before it was launched. No, sorry, he heard about it just 4 days before it was launched. And he set up this Twitter page, and he said, and by the way, this DARPA contest had a $40,000 reward for the winner. And he said, I want to engage the social community to help me find these balloons. And I'm going to set up the right incentives for people to participate in this. So he created this Twitter page, and he said, I'm willing to share this prize money with anybody who's willing to help me find the balloons. So 10 balloons, $40,000, $4,000 a pop. Now, I'm not going to be able to get to that person who finds the balloon in one step. So I need to go through a couple of people who are going to help me find the person who's going to find the red balloon. So every person along the way who has a hand in connecting me with a person who finds a red balloon is going to get part of that prize money. So that's just one example of how he set up the right incentive structures within this huge social environment to actually get to the final answer. So this is a neural network map of what actually happened for the 10 balloons. And there were 3 principles that made this work. The first one is zero cost participation. Anybody could participate. There wasn't an entry fee. There wasn't any specific criteria on who could take part in this. So pretty much he had the entire globe or everybody in the US available. And by the way, one of the questions that came up was, could people outside of the US participate? And the answer was yes. So there were people in Europe who heard about this and connected him with people in the US, and they got a piece of the prize money. So this was really open to anybody in the world. So the first one is zero cost participation. Anybody could participate, and that created incentive. There wasn't any entry criteria that barred people from being part of this. The second one is the proper incentives. As I mentioned, everybody had a stake in him finding these balloons as quickly as possible because they would get a piece of this. A lot of times when we look back at our daily work, our environments, at the end of the day, all of us work in large projects and programs and keeping the lights on. And you look at it, it kind of makes you think, do you have the right incentive structure in place for everybody to get credit or the right amount of credit? Or is it really just focused in certain parts of the organization? It kind of makes you think about these questions. So the second one was proper incentives that were set up. And the third one was real-time measurement of participants' contribution and impact. So as these conversations and connections were happening, he had set up a mechanism where people could see these connections being made. So for example, if it led to 4 people who ultimately found a balloon in Dallas, Texas, then people could actually see that in real time and focus on other areas, assuming that the balloons were spread out over the US, right? So there were certain things that could be done, but all of it was based on accurate data in real time. These were the only 3 constructs or the principles he used to set up this whole team. And to be able to mobilize this team in 48 hours and then find these balloons in less than 9 hours was something incredible. So once again, it kind of makes me think, and hopefully it makes you guys think, saying, if this is the art of the possible. What could we do within our environments? Because we have access to the same tools, we have access to the same principles, right? We have access to the same creative ideas. Is it really the way we're set up as an organization that's holding us back? So this was really one example, one of my favorite examples on how you use social and mobile at a scale that's never been imagined before to come up with an answer that nobody ever thought would ever happen so quickly. So it makes me think about, if we had to set this up within our organization and think about cross-boundary collaboration, what are the 4 or 5 things we need to think about? The first one, why do we need to think about this? That's really the core of the issue. Why is this important? So this is not just another fad. Why is this important? This is something I don't want to spend too much time on because we hear about this every day. Budgets are getting cut. We've got to do more with less. And at the end of the day, the only way we can do that is through creative, innovative thinking. We've got to do things in a way that's never been done before. And there's really an incentive to do that. The second one, this is a great time for that to happen because technology has actually enabled us to do that. 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation. While the concept of social networks exists, technology wasn't there in a simple enough fashion for everybody to use. Well, today that has completely changed, and technology has increased the power of us being able to do this. The third one, organizational connectivity versus organizational knowledge. Back in the day, what you knew as a person or as a single group was quite powerful. Today, that's really not what makes you, gives you a competitive advantage. It's really how connected you are within your organizations and to other organizations. That's really what it takes to be competitive, and that's really what's going to put you ahead and be able to do more with less. So the concept of organizational knowledge from 20 years ago, the priority has shifted to something called organizational connectivity. So that's really where the priority needs to be. In addition, I'm not saying we should trump organizational knowledge, but from a priority perspective, we often focus too much on building our teams within our silo. And if we can focus on building those teams, but making sure that they're connected to other groups and not limited by the silos that we have created, that just takes us to a whole new level. The fourth one, generational change. This is something that is all of you are very well aware of, and we at Deloitte, we have this is a struggle for us, and we think we do a pretty decent job at this, because we hire about 15,000 to 20,000 people every year, globally. When you think about the people we're hiring, a lot of those are college recruits. And this is just part of life. This is not something that we are asking them to adopt. They're coming with this. So there's an expectation that this is the way we run in business. So the fact that you can't have an IM window open, or you can't Skype, or you can't video conference, or you can't work virtually, these are concepts that they've never heard before. And they are what's going to help us be successful. So it's really important for us to embrace these technologies to make sure that we're actually building the workforce for the future. And lastly, complexity. The problems that we're being asked to solve are not getting any simpler. They're getting more complex. They're spanning geographical boundaries. And the only way we can be successful is if we embrace this and use these technologies and the processes and these methods, as opposed to expecting to solve more complex problems in the traditional way that we've tackled problems. So there are a number of drivers and reasons why doing this is not an option. It's really a requirement and a necessity. We talked about this. It's the concept of going beyond your organization. And I can't stress this enough in public sector more than anything, right? Especially at the federal level and at the state government level, across agencies and departments. When you think about how we're organized and how we interact with people and the layers that we need to go through if we have to talk to somebody in another organization, if you just step back and think about it, in many cases it's shocking. It's the way we did things 20 years ago. One of my favorite examples is when I worked at the state of New York. This was in the Department of Tax Revenue. We looked at a business process. It was a very paper-based manual business process. And we looked at every step of the way. And in step 16, the person who processes the paperwork folds the side of the paper and then passes it on to the person who does step 17. And so I'm kind of a curious person, so out of curiosity, I asked this person, why do you fold the side of the paper? Well, that's how we've always done it. No, but why do you fold it? That's how we've always done it, so we've got to do it that way. And so I started asking people, what is the reason for that fold? And long story short, and after many days of conversations with a whole bunch of people who were at the state and then also retired, because I couldn't let go of it, eventually the answer was that about 25 years ago, the person who sat on step 17 had only one arm. So for him to process that paperwork, for some reason he needed that side of the paper folded so he could do his part of the thing. That person's long gone. But they still fold the paper today. And nobody's ever questioned it. And so I apply that to our world, everyday examples, which is, are there things we do every day because we need to do it? Or because that's just the way we've always done things and we've never questioned it? I'm sure all of you could think of some very interesting examples in your daily lives where that example probably applies. So it just, once again, I don't want this to be a theoretical presentation. I just want us to have this good dialogue and think about, are there things we could apply from these good case studies and stories that will change the way we do things today and work as an organization, collectively connected to each other, as opposed to single individuals or single silos. So all of this is good, and then it comes down to, okay, I like this idea, it makes sense, how do I get started? What do I do first? There are three simple basic principles, right? The first one, choose your objective. What are you trying to achieve? Don't try to do something, set up this big science experiment of solving world hunger. Think about the problem you're trying to solve. So in the case of the Arab Spring, those are some of the objectives that they had in mind. I'm sure they will say they were not this organized, but now looking back, this is how they would have structured it. Choose your objective. The second one, choose your participants. You've got a number of stakeholders in different places who could actually help you solve that business problem. So what's your objective? Who are the people you're going to work with to be involved in that? And lastly, choose your platform. Are you going to use Facebook, Twitter, Foursquare, Pinterest? There are plenty of those out there. There are many that are being set up specifically for state government, federal agencies, for a number of security, legal requirements. Regardless of that, if you figure out what your objective is, who's there to help you out, and what your platform is, you can get started. It's really that simple. When you look back at every example that we talked about today, all of them started with these three basic principles. So one of the questions is, how do I get started? It's really these three simple examples. And by the way, I love case studies. I'm sharing these really cool examples with you. Does anybody recognize which university that is? I know most universities look like that. You guys want to take a guess? That's Johns Hopkins. So Johns Hopkins University, and this is a very recent example, happened just a couple weeks ago. There is a university, so at Johns Hopkins, they've got one of the best computer science departments. And one of their professors in the computer science departments, he's actually a senior lecturer, Peter Froelich. He teaches this class every year. It's intermediate programming. And most of us have experienced this in our college days. The concept of the curve when you grade a class. So if you got 0 to 100, and the person who gets the highest, in that case, would get 100%, and then everybody else is curved down based on that highest grade. So it's a good way to determine how you rank against your peers. So let's say you got a class and the person with the highest grade gets an 80%. That 80, the person who got the 80 out of 100 gets 100%, gets the A, and everybody else follows that curve. So we're all familiar with that model. Well, we had this past semester, this fall semester, there was a class at Johns Hopkins who took Professor Froelich's class. We actually got a little creative using social and mobile. And they said, well, if that's how the curve applies, if everybody gets a 0, we all get 100. It's an interesting concept. And we've all gone to college, right? It's been around for a long time. The curve has been around for a long time. I know I've never had that discussion with any of my colleagues back in the day. It was a very cool concept and a very cool idea. Somebody came up with a concept, which is if everybody gets a 0, we all get 100, and we all get A's. Now the hard part is convincing all of your classmates that we all need to get 0s, which means nobody needs to show up. Nobody should show up to the final exam. While that sounds really simple, you know that in every group there's always one person that worries and says, well, I may just go because I can't trust this group. I can't mess up my grade. All it takes is one person to break the whole thing down. And so what this class did this past fall semester is used social and mobile simple tools. They had a spreadsheet on Google Drive, they used Facebook, and they had a conversation with every single person to make sure that they understood the concept of what they're trying to do and convince them that every person should not show, nobody should show up to the final exam. And while it's very difficult to imagine that to get everybody to go along, the answer was that for the final exam, not a single person showed up and everybody got an A. And it was the first time in Johns Hopkins history that something like this happened. And the professor was shocked. And when you actually listen to the professor's interview on a couple of news channels, he said, I waited in the classroom for 20 minutes, and you have all the kids who are sitting outside the classroom. So it's not like people were sitting in their dorm rooms. Every single person showed up and sat outside the classroom and didn't go in for the finals. And it completely busted the curve. And so, once again, it makes you think about, you take these traditional ways we do things and you apply these creative ideas and technologies in a very quick fashion, you can make some unbelievable things happen. Now, post this event, the professor has changed his grading scheme. He made very sure of that. So while the concept of the curve still exists, he has made it clear that if everybody gets a 0, if a certain people get a 0, then that you're going to get a 0 in the class. So he has had to alter a traditional rule that has been around for a very long time because of a bunch of kids who use social and mobile to change the way the university operates. Just think about that. I wish I had done that. Once again, these are all examples of going back to our daily lives and saying, are there things we could do differently using these simple principles to completely change the way we do things? And so all of this is very easy to say, but what is going to make this work? What is going to make this successful? There are a couple of key things, some more important than others, especially in our state government environment. Transparency is so important. If you go back to the example of DARPA and the 10 red balloons, the ability for every participant around the world to see in real time how those connections were being made helped the cause. So you can't just do this in isolation. It's a two-way traffic communication, and transparency is absolutely important to this. Cost effectiveness. All of this is done on very low cost, with very low cost requirements. You can't come up with this really expensive solution. It's never going to fly. No organization has the capacity to do that. So think about how do I achieve transparency using a very low cost, if not no cost method, using human capital. How do I make sure people are accountable? So you can have a lot of false positives when you do experiments like this. How do I make sure people are accountable in driving everybody to solve that single business problem as opposed to going off to all these random directions? Security is absolutely important. You can't stress that enough in state and federal and local government. How do I make sure all of this happens within the confines of the security and the privacy and the regulatory and the compliance requirements that we rightfully have to abide by? Some organizations can kind of skirt by that whole issue. We as in public sector, we can't. Innovation. All of this needs to be done in a way that's never been done before. You can't take traditional methods and try to use these tools. You could. It's really not going to be that effective. You've got to think about a completely creative and innovative way to do these types of things. And lastly, most importantly, at the end of the day, is this helping the mission of our agency or department? If it's not, we shouldn't be doing this. Waste our time. So all of this needs to be focused towards enhancing the mission of our agency or department to make sure that we connect with constituents better and we engage with them better. If we can think about these as the features of the solution that we want to build using those 3 basic principles, you've got something going. And this is not something that's we're preaching here. Many organizations have done this very effectively for a number of years, and it's worked. There are plenty of examples to demonstrate this. The big question comes down to who manages this from a social network perspective. And there are three buckets. The first one is the concept of a community gardener. You want somebody to kind of nurture and have a light touch towards that community, but not tell them, here's exactly how you need to do things. When you tell a group exactly how they need to do certain things, all of a sudden they're focused on that and they don't think creatively. They don't realize, they don't think about if there are other options there or not. So the first concept of a community, or the first type is, if you want to solve a really broad business problem or a tough business problem in a unique or creative way, you've got to set aside the boundaries. And that means the person organizing this or the managing this needs to not impose his or her will on how that community is being managed and the type of dialogue that happens. you got to give that community some freedom. So that's why the concept of community gardener exists, where you nurture that along, give it a light touch, make sure that overall you're going in the right direction, but not prescribing to them exactly what needs to happen. The second concept is a strong central organizer. In some cases, and the best example of this is the IRS and the federal government. When you file your tax returns and you use e-file, you have to follow some standards in terms of security and format and those types of things. Everybody just can't send file their tax returns in any random fashion using spreadsheets or their personal tools that they use. It has to be in a structured manner using some type of framework. So this is an example where the IRS organizes a large community of tax preparers and personal filers, but there's a structure to that. So in that case, you have to be organized and you have to prescribe how you do certain things. And lastly, you've got no organizers, right? You could have communities that go off in total random fashion, right? They may come up with the most creative ideas. There may be a lot of false positives. You may have people getting distracted. In some cases, that may be good. In cases where it's problems that have never been solved before, you may want that complete random chaos because you never know where the next cool idea is, right? So you want to not organize that in any fashion. In state and local and federal government, that's probably not going to happen, or there are very far few of those. I haven't come across any of those. I'd love to hear of any examples where you may have seen that. But most of the examples are in the first two. So when you think about what role should you play within your organization in facilitating these networks, the first two roles are things you should think about as far as what is the mission and what is an appropriate role for you or somebody in your organization to take when you manage this network to ultimately solve your problem. And so with that being said, the last, what I wanted to leave you with is rules of the road. Because with all of this, we talked about really cool examples, why we need to do this, great examples of where people have done this before. If you had to get started, how do you do this? And some principles to follow. And lastly, the rules of the road in managing this going forward. The first one is the inclusion paradox. The more open you are, the more people you have participating in your community, the greater the power. The example I have in my mind is, imagine if Facebook charged every person $1 a month to participate. How many of us would actually be using that? Not that $1 is the issue, but the concept of paying for something, right? A lot of the population has that issue. So you would actually not have access to the majority of the population if you had something as simple as a $1 per month or $1 per year. Even if it's $1 every 5 years, I'm sure we would lose a pretty sizable part of our population, right? In getting them engaged on that platform to begin with. So you got it from a priority perspective. The mistake I see a lot of people make is they set up these barriers to entry when they get started. So all of a sudden you're not an effective platform before you even get started. So your goal should be to get a lot of people engaged as quickly as possible, because that's really where the power lies. The second one, high power at low cost. I really like the Spider-Man movies, right? And the line from the Spider-Man movie is, with great power comes great responsibility, right? When you think about the tools that you have available in your hand today, and the computing power, and the ability to hit any cross-section in the world today in a moment's notice, that's actually kind of scary. So to be able to use that wisely, to use the tools wisely, and not end up with issues or front page of the newspaper type of issues, right, with the way you set these things up, that's something you got to be very careful about, because while you can use technology to get to a large audience really quickly, the issue is you can use technology to get to a large audience very quickly, and you could do some unfortunate things if you don't manage it carefully. So something to keep in mind is, when you have access to this large community and large population, just make sure that you use technology wisely to get to the end result. And lastly, something to be aware of with anything we do in life, or anything we do in agencies and departments, is there unintended consequences. And we have to be aware of that. And we have to talk about that, be prepared for that. You can't plan for the worst case scenario or every single worst case scenario, but as long as you talk about it and are aware of the possibilities of what could happen when everybody's in charge, but nobody's in charge, right? That's the issue you have. Something to think about as you go down this journey. But those are really the three key things I wanted to leave you with, which is, as you think about using social and mobile within your agencies and departments and working with your end users and customers to enhance your brand. How do you get started? It's really that simple. There are plenty of places that have done this many times before, so please don't reinvent the wheel. Please look up examples. It's all out there. It's something that has to be done. This is not an option. The question is, how do you take control of it? How do you be a first mover? How do you engage your constituents using these technologies? Because it could really put you in a place where you've never been before and just change the way you do things from a government perspective. All right, well, hopefully this was helpful and insightful. Happy to stay back and answer any questions, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.